The first time I met her, I didn't even know her name. I only knew her reputation. Everyone in the area called her that WA lady. The kind of person who walked around with a clipboard like it was a badge of authority, correcting people on grass length, trash can placement, and parking lines that only existed in her imagination. I had just moved into my house a few months earlier. It was a quiet, standalone property at the edge of a suburban neighborhood. Important detail. My house was not part of the HOA. Never had been. It predated the entire neighborhood by years, and legally, it stood completely separate from their association rules. But HOA Karen didn't care about facts. She cared about control. From day one, she acted like my home offended her personally. She showed up one afternoon while I was fixing the fence, arms crossed, sunglasses on, clipboard tucked under her elbow. "You need to repaint that fence," she said without greeting me. I looked up, confused. "Why? It doesn't match community standards," she replied sharply. I calmly told her, "This house isn't part of the HOA." She smirked like I'd just told a joke. "Everyone here is part of the HOA." That was the first red flag. Over the next few weeks, she kept coming back. Complaints about my driveway, my mailbox, the angle of my trash bin. Every time, I repeated the same sentence. "I don't belong to your WA." She never listened. Instead, she escalated. One morning, I found a bright orange notice taped to my door. WA violation, immediate action required. It listed fines, deadlines, and threats of forced compliance. That's when I realized this wasn't just a misunderstanding. This was entitlement. I tore the notice down and ignored it. That only made things worse. A few days later, she showed up again, this time furious. "You are violating WA bylaws," she snapped. "If you don't comply, we'll take action." I laughed. I couldn't help it. "You have no authority here." Her eyes narrowed. "We'll see about that." That's when she mentioned the master key. "I have access to all properties in this neighborhood," she said proudly. "If you won't cooperate, I'll inspect the home myself." I told her very clearly, very slowly. "If you step onto my property again without permission, it's trespassing." She scoffed and walked away. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. It happened on a weekday afternoon. I was at work. My wife had taken the kids out, so the house was empty. Quiet. Locked. According to the neighbor across the street, WA Karen marched up to my front door like she owned the place. She pulled out a shiny key attached to a labeled tag, WA Master. She inserted it into my lock. It didn't turn. She tried again. Nothing. She jiggled it. Forced it. Still nothing. That lock had been replaced years ago, long before I bought the house. She stepped back, clearly angry, and tried the back door. Same result. That's when frustration turned into outrage. Because in her mind, the problem wasn't that she was trespassing. The problem was that her authority wasn't working. So she did what entitled people always do when reality disagrees with them. She called the police. She dialed 911 from my front porch. Not because there was a crime. Not because there was danger. But because her master key didn't work. She told the dispatcher that a homeowner was refusing WA access, that the property was non-compliant, and that she feared obstruction. Every word was exaggerated. Every claim was false. She expected the police to arrive, force entry, and put me in my place. What she didn't know was that this phone call was about to expose everything. Because my son was working that shift. But that part comes later. For now, what matters is why she did it. She genuinely believed she had the right to enter my home. Not because the law said so. Not because she had a warrant. But because she had power in her little WA bubble, and she assumed it applied everywhere. That's the danger of unchecked authority. She wasn't enforcing rules. She was enforcing ego. To her, my house wasn't private property. It was a challenge. And challenges to people like her must be crushed. She didn't see a locked door. She saw defiance. And defiance, in her world, deserved punishment. So she stood there, phone pressed to her ear, confidently reporting a problem homeowner, fully expecting backup to arrive and validate her. She had no idea that by dialing 911, she had just crossed a line that couldn't be undone. A line between WA fantasy power and real-world consequences. And this time, her clipboard wasn't going to save her. When the master key didn't work, WA Karen didn't see a failed attempt at breaking into a private home. To her, it wasn't a lock or a law that stood in the way, it was her authority being questioned, and that was unacceptable. She dialed 911 immediately. Not because there was a crime in progress, not because someone was in danger, but because in her mind, the police existed to enforce her sense of power. She held the phone to her ear, her hands slightly trembling, not from fear, but from impatience. She expected instant compliance. On the other end of the line, the dispatcher's voice was calm and professional. But HOA Karen didn't hear professionalism, she heard obligation. Yes, hello, this homeowner is refusing access to their property. They are non-compliant. I'm concerned they might obstruct me, she stammered, embellishing every detail to make it sound urgent. Every word was designed to sound like she was the victim, not the aggressor. In her mind, she had already won. The police would arrive. They would follow her lead. The house would be inspected. And she would walk away with the satisfaction of enforcing the rules that she believed transcended reality. But reality has a way of humbling even the most confident. Unbeknownst to her, the person answering the 911 call that day wasn't some ordinary dispatcher. It was my son, sitting at his station, headset on, screens glowing in front of him. He was trained, calm, and completely aware of the situation before she even finished her exaggerated story. 911, what's your emergency? He asked in a neutral, professional tone. There was a brief pause. HOA Karen froze, realizing she was no longer speaking to some faceless operator she could manipulate. Her words faltered. Well, there's a homeowner refusing, compliance with HOA regulations. My son's voice remained calm. Ma'am, can you confirm the address and your relation to the property? This simple question, something she expected would be a mere formality, sent her into panic. She was caught between her inflated sense of power and the reality of the law. She couldn't provide proof. She wasn't an official authority over my property. She had no legal right to demand entry. Her usual confidence crumbled. For the first time, she realized that the police weren't automatically on her side. Her stories and accusations didn't carry weight without validation. And the fact that the person on the other end of the line was my son, someone who knew the house, the ownership, and her history of entitlement, made it even worse. You are aware that this property is not part of the HOA? He asked, still calm but firm. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Well, I thought. She had no answer. There was no clever comeback, no argument that could justify her actions. For the first time, the scales of power had shifted. By the end of the call, she had been completely silenced. She had dialed 911 thinking she was enforcing authority, but in reality, she had exposed herself as a trespasser trying to claim control over someone else's property. The irony wasn't lost on anyone who heard the story later. The same person she intended to intimidate, my son, was the one who turned the tables on her. She left the property that day not victorious, but shocked and humiliated. Every sense of entitlement she carried had met the reality of law and professionalism, and she had no choice but to retreat. Her plan had failed spectacularly. It was a lesson she wouldn't forget. Calling 911 doesn't automatically make you right, and power without authority is nothing more than arrogance waiting to be humbled. By the time HOA Karen realized her call to 911 had backfired, it was already too late. She had dialed the number expecting immediate reinforcement of her imagined authority, only to encounter reality, and my son, on the other end of the line. The moment my son answered, her confident, entitled facade began to crumble. She had rehearsed her story in her mind countless times. The homeowner is non-compliant, refuses HOA access, potential obstruction. She expected the dispatcher to nod, ask for the address, and call for backup. That would have been enough for her. That would have been victory. But my son didn't react the way she anticipated. He stayed calm, professional, and precise. Can you confirm your identity and your authority over this property? He asked. Her confidence faltered immediately. For the first time in this escalating series of events, she paused. Her eyes widened, and the color drained from her face. She was frozen, unsure how to respond. Her rehearsed lines fell apart. Well, I have the master key, and it's my job to, she stammered, trailing off into silence. Silence filled the line. My son, fully aware of her tactics, waited patiently. He wasn't just another dispatcher. He knew the details of the house, the fact that she had no legal authority, and that her claims were baseless. You do realize, he continued, voice steady, that this property is private and not part of your HOA. Entering it without permission would be considered trespassing. That single statement was all it took. HOA Karen, who had spent months believing she could bend rules and people to her will, froze completely. Her hands shook slightly as she gripped the phone. The master key in her pocket suddenly felt meaningless. Her entitlement, once so bold, evaporated under the weight of law and accountability. Every threat she had imagined evaporated instantly. The police would not enforce her fantasy of authority. The system she had counted on to validate her power had just exposed her as a trespasser and an abuser of her HOA position. She tried to argue. But, the homeowner, they should comply. That's the rules. My son's voice remained calm but firm. Those rules do not apply here. This property is outside your HOA jurisdiction. Any attempt to force entry could result in legal consequences for you, not the homeowner. Her face turned red, then pale. She couldn't think of anything to say. Her usual manipulations, her charm, and her threats, all of it failed instantly. The longer she stayed on the line, the more she realized that she had overstepped every boundary. Finally, she hung up. Not because she had resolved anything, but because there was nothing left to say. The call ended with her completely humiliated, powerless, and exposed. She had called 911 thinking she would assert control, only to have the reality of the law, and my son's professionalism, show her exactly how wrong she was. Her entire plan had failed, and she had no choice but to retreat, shuffling off the property with nothing to show for her efforts except embarrassment. From that day forward, HOA Karen knew that her authority had limits. Her power was not universal, and entitlement could not override legality. My son's voice had reminded her of a truth she had refused to accept for months. Power without authority is nothing more than arrogance, and arrogance is destined to be humbled. The story spread quickly among neighbors. People laughed at the irony. The very person she tried to intimidate was the one who neutralized her threat in seconds. It became a lesson in humility, a reminder that no matter how confident or entitled someone may feel, reality always has the final say. And for me and my family, it was a relief. What could have escalated into a confrontation ended with nothing more than embarrassment for HOA Karen, and a story we would retell for years about the day her master key couldn't unlock the truth.